If you're wondering how professional photographers get such beautiful images with blurry backgrounds but subjects that pop, then this is the video for you.
By the end of this video, you'll not only understand what a prime lens is and why they're really important for portrait and wedding photographers, but also which prime lens is right for you and for your next lens purchase.
But before we jump into that, we want to introduce ourselves.
I'm Hunter.
And I'm Sarah.
And we're Hunter and Sarah Photography, a husband and wife professional wedding photography team.
We're also educators, and our goal is to help photographers build strong foundations in both their businesses and their personal lives, so they can build profitable and sustainable photography businesses.
Now, last week we began our Camera Bag Essentials video series with a discussion on DSLR versus mirrorless cameras. So if you missed it or you're interested in that, the link is in the description below. But this week we're focusing our attention on prime lenses.
So whether you're just getting started or if you've been shooting for a while and are just ready to expand your kit to more professional gear, you've probably asked yourself which prime lens is right for you between the 50mm, the 85mm, and the 35mm.
But before we dive into the pros and cons of each of these three lenses, we want to briefly discuss what a prime lens is in the first place. So let's dive right in.
Now, if you've ever seen an image like this and wondered how photographers get such crisp images where their subjects are in focus, but the background is silky smooth and blurry, the secret is a prime lens.
Now, there are really two things that make a prime lens a prime lens. They have low aperture and they have a fixed focal length. So if that doesn't mean anything to you right now, that's totally fine. And we're gonna break down what both of those mean. So for starters, aperture is one of the three ways that a photographer controls their camera and ultimately influences the way that their final images are actually going to look. Now, aperture specifically is basically how narrow or wide open your lens is going to open and let light in through your lens and into your camera's sensor. And again, if that doesn't mean a whole lot to you, kind of a more intuitive way to think about aperture is that aperture is the thing that gives your images blurry backgrounds.
Images that are shot closed down with a higher f-stop number, like this landscape photo, will be clear in the foreground as well as in the background. Notice how all of the vineyard posts, from the one closest to the camera all the way to the one furthest away, are all in focus.
On the other hand, images that are shot wide open, like this one, will have part of the image that's really clear and crisp, and another part that's really blurry and out of focus. So in this image, notice how Charlie and Bailey, our couple, really seems to pop from the background.
Yeah. Every lens you buy has a minimum aperture, which will tell you how blurry you can get your images' backgrounds using that lens. Lower numbers mean blurrier backgrounds, and that's where prime lenses come in. Prime lenses have lower minimum apertures than any other lenses, like 1.8 or 1.2.
So like we mentioned, that low minimum aperture, that's the first of two things that really set prime lenses apart. And the second one is that fixed focal length. And really that's just a fancy photographer way of saying they're lenses that don't zoom in and out. So it's a 50mm and that's it, or it's an 85mm and that's it. So if you want to make your subject bigger or smaller, it's no zooming in and out with your lens, but you just have to stand up and walk forward and walk back. That's it. There's no zooming on prime lenses.
So if it isn't really clear by now, one of the main things that distinguishes professional portrait photography from amateur portrait photography is the ability to really pull your subject and grab them out of the background.
So check out these two images here. The one on the left was taken by one of our apprentices on a wedding day with just a standard kit lens, the kind of inexpensive zoom lens that comes with your camera when you first buy it. So it's taken at f5.6, which is a relatively kind of mid-range aperture number. But if you look at the image and you see, yes, the couple is in focus, but so is the sidewalk behind them, as well as the parking sign and the ashtray. And because just about everything in this image is in focus, we feel like some of the background can be a bit distracting from Roxana and Eric, our couple.
Now, if you look at the image on the right, this was taken by Hunter using a prime lens that was at f1.8. Notice how the couple is still in focus, but the sidewalk is just a blur, and Roxana and Eric really pop from the background. Which of these images looks more professional?
In our opinion, it's the one on the right. And that's why prime lenses are so important.
So now that we've convinced you that you need a prime lens, the only remaining question is, which one?
So there are literally dozens of different prime lenses that you can buy from all of the major camera makers, from ultra wide 10mm to super zoomed in telephoto 800mm. But the good news is that for most portrait photographers just getting started, you don't need to choose between 50 different options, because there are really just three classic prime lenses that most photographers are going to consider when they're first getting started. There's the 85mm, the 50mm, and the 35mm.
Now, as simple as it would be to just tell you one lens is better than the rest, you should just go buy that one, it's really not that simple. Where I love my 50 millimeter. I use my 50 millimeter 95% of the time. Hunter is obsessed with his 85 millimeter. That is his primary lens. And he has a 35 millimeter that he uses as his secondary lens. So when it comes to my lens, the 50 millimeter, this is the most popular choice for beginner photographers as their first lens. It's a great generalist lens, meaning with just a few steps forward or a few steps backward, you can capture the tightest and most intimate detail of a couple, or you can take those few steps backwards and capture a grander wide shot without changing lenses.
Now, the one thing, or rather another advantage that the 50 has over the 85 is that it is just straight up cheaper, which means most photographers, especially just getting started, really starting to make their first money, you're gonna be able to get your hands on a 50 much sooner than you can on the 85. However, I absolutely love the telephoto or more zoomed in nature of the 85 millimeter lens because it's really uniquely suited for portraits. If you plan on doing anything other than portraits, photojournalism, landscape, sports, whatever, the 85 is probably not the lens for you. Just go with the 50 because it is a great generalist. However, because the 85 is more zoomed in, the background just melts away. And even more so than the 50 millimeter, you get this really beautiful, what's called background compression, where you really kind of separate and pull your subject out from a background that really fades into the distance. Now, I understand that I'm among a very small minority of photographers who did purchase the 85 millimeter as their first prime lens. Like Sarah said, most of you will probably just land on the 50 as your generalist, as your first lens, but I just honestly loved the look of what 85 millimeter lenses produced and knew it had to be my first lens. Now, one caveat with the 85, aside from it being a little more expensive, is that because it is more zoomed, I was always standing further away from our clients than Sarah was, meaning I had to project and be a little bit louder. So if that is not your style, if you are not kind of a loud person like I am, then the 85 also might not be a great choice just for that reason.
So words everywhere. To give you an idea of how these lenses compare, here's two images that Hunter and I shot side by side on a wedding day. The image on the left is shot with the 50 millimeter and the image on the right was shot with the 85 millimeter. Now, as you can see, I was able to stand just a few feet away from our couple, from Nicole and Tyler, and still capture them in the context of their wedding venue and capture them beautifully while also showcasing the natural beauty around them.
On the other hand, I absolutely love how much more blurry the background is in the image on the right and how Nicole and Tyler are so clearly the focus of the image. It's almost to the point where you can barely even tell where they are. Now, ultimately, at the end of the day, whether you do choose the 50 or the 85 as your first lens is really a matter of just personal preference. Neither of the two images that we just showed you are technically better than the other, but they're different. And you need to decide which one aligns more with your shooting style and your business. However, we do believe that it's gonna be one of those two lenses that should be your first prime lens purchase.
Yeah, so if you're sitting there thinking, Hunter and Sarah, what about the 35 millimeter? Well, we love the 35 meter and we think that it's a great addition to any camera bag. We don't think that it should come before the 50 or the 85 millimeter as your first prime lens. It takes beautiful wide shots, but it's not ideal for that close-up portrait work that you will want to capture, and it doesn't have nearly the same level of background compression as the 50 or the 85.
So as you can see from this image, the 35 millimeter can definitely take beautiful images. We just feel like it's a bit limiting to have a 35 as your only prime lens. Now, for me, it was the second prime lens that I purchased, and still to this day, I shoot side by side with my 85 on one camera and my 35 on the other, both of them, strapped onto my camera harness, and I love shooting that way, but I still shoot the vast majority of the images with the 85 and just pull the 35 up when I want either a really cool wide shot without having to run like 100 yards back with the 85, or if I want kind of a really unique, tight, wide, almost fisheye composure. But again, this is the vast minority of photos that I take, and mostly I use the 85. And out of all the photographers we've talked to, most of them seem to use the 35 as kind of an accent to another lens as opposed to their kind of workhorse main lens.
Yeah, so that's all we really have to say about those three lenses. At the end of the day, it just comes down to your personal preference for the imagery itself.
Yeah. So guys, thank you so much for watching this video. We really do hope that it has helped you figure out which lens is going to be right for you and your business. Now, if you want an even deeper dive into these three lenses, you can check out the more detailed written version of this video in the Hunter and Sarah photography blog. The link is below.
And if you're ready to go ahead and purchase one of these lenses, whether the DSLR version or the mirrorless version, we would be honored if you would consider using our affiliate link below. It'll cost the same as it would if you just purchased it straight from Amazon. We just get a small cut, almost as a thank you for making this video.
But either way, this video is only the second in a 10-part series all about camera gear for professional portrait and wedding photographers. So make sure you like, subscribe, turn on notifications so you don't miss any of the other videos in this series.
Yeah, and if you want more helpful, free content for photographers, as well as a community of people who are also building their photography businesses, we'd invite you to join the Hunter and Sarah Photography Education Community on Facebook. The links for all of this are below.
Well, that's it. Thanks, guys. We'll see you next week.